coming off the street, and some of you who are just coming off the Pacific Ocean. It's a delight to have so many people here from Upland. If you're not from Upland, feel like a second-rate citizen. Because Upland is just so fabulous. Anyway, for those of you who have come from Upland, it's been a long trip, but we love it that you do it, and we're looking forward to doing it in reverse sometime soon.
Sister City Upland President has just arrived.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much for having me.
You're totally special.
Oh, thank you. They are special for us. You are special for us. Thank you for inviting us and having us here. Thank you
So much indeed.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Brenda will be planting a tree later in the day down at the homestead. But this morning we're also planting a tree out at our Upland garden, and Carol is going to be doing that shortly. So we're all ready to.
Perfect. I'm ready.
Dig a hole.
I'm ready
Yep.
to put the flag.
Yep.
And happy 50th birthday, everybody.
If I may for a moment, please, I'd like to acknowledge our mayor that has just arrived, Councillor Simon Clements.
Brenda, the President, and the Mayor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And obviously Councillor Eckwell.
Thank
you. And happy Mildura Day, folks. It is special, and the welcome has already been made to the Uplanders and to many of our Chafee family that we have here over the next day or so.
Thanks. Maybe just to make it clear, seeing that Sister City has been in charge all week, but today is Mildura Day and it's a Chafee Trail, so any problems, Mark's the man.
And I'll handball it to Julie.
Yeah. Well, because it is Mildura Day, there is a song that has been written, and if anybody's been listening to Councillor Mark's radio, you would have heard it. But I'd like to play it for you now. You will get the words, and you will be able to sing it tonight full gusto. Okay? So here it is, just for a moment. It's only the word. It's only the song, not the vision. But it's very meaningful.
In 1886, a man named George Chafee arrived by paddle steamer. He had knowledge, he had plans, and a vision for this land of what could be achieved with irrigation. It was May 31 in 1887. After months of hard negotiation, an indenture was signed for the purchase of the lease, known as Mildura Station. As the brothers George and W.B. started laying out their plans, they were truly men of vision and saw the promise of this land. George designed the pumps to raise the water to the land. W.C. planted orchards, roads and channels. They even planned a township where today our city stands. A credit to these forward-thinking men. They were joined in their endeavors by folks from many lands. These pioneers faced hardships through drought and salted land. Some fell to depression, but many of them stayed. They overcame the problems standing in their way. They began to see the fruits of their labors unfold. They were truly men with a vision. They turned water into gold. Now many years have passed, and their legacy remains. They created an oasis where once was arid land. it has grown. With its avenues and tree-lined streets, the shapely plan has shown. A tribute to our pioneers who faced all odds and won. So let us drink a toast to them on this Mildura Day, the 31st of May.
That was written for Mildura Day.
I love it. I love what you do.
Could you just say that again? Who are you?
Oh, Christina Despoterius, and I'm with Sister Cities Australia. I'm from Melbourne. So
Sister City has become very important, but I still think we're the most special.
absolutely, absolutely, because it's just such a unique combination of
Yeah.
two cities that have really, really clicked because of the historical perspective. So happy Mildura Day and happy 50th anniversary.
Thank you very, very much for that, and we love it all. We love it all. Everything that Melbourne does with Thessaloniki and all that sort of thing.
Oh, look, I actually created that.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out into this beautiful weather. The building you have just emerged from was opened in 1908. It was the Carnegie Library. The money came from Andrew Carnegie, who, of course, was the US steel multi-billionaire, and he gave money all around the world for libraries. This was our library for 90 years. It's now the headquarters of the Historical Society and the Genealogical Society, but we were very lucky to be given this building back in 1908. It was enlarged in 1922. As you can see, it's a First World War memorial. The two plaques on either side of the entrance list the names of the 199 people who died who had enlisted in Mildura. Mildura had the highest rate of enlisting at the time per capita in Australia. Those 199 names all died in the First World War. And the tower was added in 1922 as a war memorial. So every Anzac Day, when the marchers go past, they salute the building because it's a war memorial. It's been our Historical Society for the last 20 years or so. We're going to head down now. We're going to pass the civic buildings, which is one of the two major buildings for the headquarters of Mildura Rural City Council, and we'll stop and talk in front of the Working Man's Club. If anybody is thirsty, you know how to get in. There are several surprising things about the beginning of Mildura as an irrigation settlement. Firstly, the Chaffee brothers and the government made it a prohibition place. You weren't allowed to drink. Wow, that's great for a place that's going to grow wine. But that was the situation, and it was the reason why people come to Mildura and say, how many pubs have you got? And I say, well, we've now got 3. For a long time we had 2. They go to Broken Hill and there's 46. And they think, what's wrong with Mildura? Well, in place of that we had the clubs. The Mildura Club. Can I be very rude and break up society into 3 strata? The aristocracy went to the Mildura Club, which is still a fabulous building. The bourgeoisie went to the Settlers Club, which is now a lot of other things, buildings and compartments and things. But that was the second, the middle class one, and this is the bottom. Now, there was a lot of opposition. The other ones began in 1891, 92, 93, but as a lot of them said, we don't want our workers to drink. We want them to come to work sober. So they didn't want it. So there was opposition galore to the Working Man's Club being established. But it was eventually established in 1894. And would you believe the river went down? So now that they were allowed to have beer, they couldn't get any. Because everything in those days came up by river. They started off in Madden Avenue and then moved here at the beginning of the century, and it was greatly enlarged in 1935 when we got the second floor added. A lot of people, there are a lot of people who are going to ask the obviously embarrassing question, can we go and see the world's longest bar? And the answer is that it doesn't exist anymore. Oh, 1, 2, 3. Oh. It was removed in 1995. It was very long. It was indeed, according to the Guinness Book of Records that were published at that time, the longest bar in the world at about 91 metres or excuse me for remembering, but I never could forget a figure, 298 feet, 7.5 inches long. And on a good day back in the 50s and 60s, you would find men everywhere, mostly men everywhere, 6 or 7 deep. They did a lot of drinking. But the world has changed, you see. I think the committee did the right thing in getting rid of it. For a start, you would have it established as the world's longest, and somebody somewhere else would build one that was 1 foot longer. So they had to build one here that was 2 foot longer to keep ahead. And it was costing a fortune, and people had changed their habits. They were doing more being booked by police on the roads, so they did more drinking at home. Lots of things changed at that stage, so they decided to pull the bar out, make it a more sociable thing inside, introduce the pokies, introduce a fabulous TAB setup, and so on. So that was the change. There are lots of historic buildings around Mildura that have one of those. The Sister City put those up about 3 or 4 years ago, and you'll find them on several buildings giving a brief history of what they are, and you'll find them littered over there. Now, what we should do now, if you don't... Oh, incidentally, if anybody wants any information on the Working Man's Club longest bar, they do have a free brochure up there on the counter, but don't worry about it if you don't want to get it, but they are there. I'm going to take a risk of trying to cross the road here because we're going to be running short of time if I'm not careful. Down on the next the next corner, the old Methodist Church and the Church of Christ. The following corner, the Church of England and the Presbyterian Church. The Methodist Church is no longer a church, it's the auditorium for MAIDEC, the Education Council, which is adult education and organises a lot of picking groups and that sort of thing. The Presbyterian Church is now the Uniting Church because that happened in 1977. Take a look at them if you can. Fisher's, the most widely spread, locally originating firm in the district that began with Eugene Fisher in Merbeen. They all began as men only. None of them, of course, is allowed to be now, thank goodness. I mean, I had a friend who was a bloke in the YWCA, but you can do anything you like, you see. It's a different world today. This was only done about 2 or 3 years ago, where they completely cleared the whole thing, except, and our Historical Society put in a demand, don't you dare touch our Washingtonias. Now the Washingtonia is the tallest of the palm trees around the place, and we've got 4 of them just there. So they were not allowed to remove them when they cleared everything, but that's why everything looks so open and fresh and new. It's going to be wonderful when it's wonderful now, but it's going to be wonderful when it gets bit there. Anyway, we're going to go down to the end there and we'll see what we can do from there. Thank you very much. Now, these are our 2 plantations. We've got the Upland plantation in front of you, and in a moment we're going to have a tree planting. But just so that you know, this is where our flag poles are. We've been flying the American flag all week, dear old glory and all that sort of, all week. We raise it especially on the 4th of July. On the 1st of July, we raised the Canadian flag because the Chaffee brothers were Canadian, and that's our Brockville. Brockville is in Ontario province, Brockville, Canada, and the Australian flag and the American flag are great special things for us. We raise them. You've got to do this with flags. They go up in the morning and they come down at night. It's got to be done that way. A few years ago, we were sister cities. When Mildura was a shire before the uniting, Mildura Shire was actually sister cities with Brockville. I am trying to get us back with Brockville. Brockville is a sister city to Ontario in California. I've heard rumours that Ontario is thinking of changing its name to South Upland. That would be a gorgeous reversal of history, wouldn't it? Because Upland was North Ontario until 1906. But we would like to make a good, strong bond with Brockville because every person here is just so indebted to the Chaffee brothers. Anyway, can I hand over to Councillor Mark Eckel?
Thank you very much, Glenn. Welcome everyone. I've got my George Chaffee hat on, but I'm going to take the George Chaffee hat off for a time being as I welcome you as a city councillor. And doing that, it'd be very remiss of me if I didn't acknowledge our wonderful Mayor Clements over here, and also at the same time acknowledge the wonderful work that is done by our outdoor staff of Mildura Rural City Council, who answered my request in an instant to be able to plant a tree here today in memory of your visit and the 50th anniversary. And I'd like to thank Chris and Wade over here for coming out. And they've got the most healthiest of magnolia trees, hand chosen by our staff. And at this time, when we're doing official ceremonies like this on behalf of Council, we like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, our wonderful Aboriginal people, and it's the Latchin tribe here and the Barkinji over the river in New South Wales. And at the same time, we have a Native American Indian in Jean here, and I'd like to recognise your nation, Jean, as well as traditional owners of your land. So, without any further ado, because it's the Upland plantation, I would like to call President Ian forward, and Ian, you can direct the planting of the tree today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Certainly welcome again to you all. Carol, the Vice President of the Upland Sister City Association, is going to plant the tree. So, Carol, would you like to come forward, please? I'm not sure if you have an assistant.
Sorry.
A little later in the day, we are planting, Brenda, the President, will be planting another tree down at the homestead, but we're very pleased to have this one in this plantation. So, Carol, would you like to say a word?
Well, I just cannot express how much we appreciate your hospitality and your gracious kindness to us. You have thought of everything that we could imagine, and it's far more than we even could have guessed that we would be experiencing here. And I know all of us agree that we have such a special relationship, and this is an honor to be putting this in.
Thank you. Maybe I can ask Tom. Tom has been on the board for many years of the Sister City also. He might be able to assist Carol in just putting a little bit of dirt in and to water in our tree.
I must say, Carol is the brains, I'll be the brawn.
Okay.
Should I throw in the first shovel?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, Carol. Chairman of the Water Authority to water the tree.
We're doing very well.
One more time, Carol, one more time. Let's get it.
Look here, guys. Beautiful.
Mark, look. Mark.
I'll try not to get any dirt on your shoes.
Look here, guys. Here we go, a couple more. Beautiful. Thank you. That's great. Great. Alright, that's so Greg.
You're right.
I'm part of it. Alrighty.
Oh, yeah.
For a sec. See how that looks. So just take your sunglasses off, that's alright, or are they? Yeah, that'd be great. Sorry, man. Just easy to see your eyes, that's all. Yeah, if you just...
Then we put a little water in.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep, thank you.
And Glenn.
What he's a politician.
Recovering politician.
It really is an honor for us, and I appreciate the chance to do this. It'll be here for years.
The name Magnolia is of great importance, and we'll talk about that sometime, but I'm just so delighted that that has been done today. I would like to acknowledge that we have a couple of people here who are Chafies. I can see a great-grandson, I can see a great-great-grandson, and other people here who are descendants of the Chafies, because the Chafies is the great link. There's a statue here of W.B. Chafee. You have a fabulous sculpture of George Chafee outside your departmental offices and library and so on. We'd love a copy of that. You can have a copy of ours. But the link is magnificent. Perhaps the most extraordinary part of the link is where we are. I'd like to point out that when W.B. Chafee was designing this will be Deacon Avenue, but I want it to look like Euclid Avenue, because Euclid Avenue was so fabulously successful. Euclid Avenue is a beautiful thoroughfare, and this is based on it. Sidewalk and road and centre plantation and road and nature strip and sidewalk, all comparable to what there is in Euclid Avenue. What there was in Euclid Avenue was wonderful. there was a tram, and it was pulled up the hill by a mule. And you all know the story. The mule pulled the tram loaded with people up the hill. Then the mule got on the tram and rode happily back down the hill. Now, because that tram existed, they decided that they would do the same thing here. We were to have had a tram pulled by a kangaroo or something that went from the river to Crossroads. We never got it, but that's the reason why this centre plantation is so beautifully wide. So luck was always on our side. It didn't happen all the time in everything, but so many things are wonderful, and that's one, and this is beautiful. Now, somehow or other, I've got to get you across the road again. W.B. Chaffee, excuse me always for calling him W.B. Chaffee, but that was what he was known as. There were only three, he had three different names. He was W.B. Chaffee to everybody. To those who worked for him, he was the boss. To his wife, he was Will. But I think she was the only one who ever called him Will. His name, of course, was William Benjamin, but W.B. is the name of the... And he was our cityscape designer. Now, of course, he's got a beautiful model to work on, because what he had already succeeded with in Ontario, Upland, worked, and he knew it'd work here, and that's why we've got this fabulous street. And everywhere from 7th to 11th was part of his plan. People often ask, why did he call the first street 7th Street? But the answer is very easy. If you look at a map of the whole district, the river is not a well-behaved river. It meanders gorgeously, and if you look at the map, there's First Street up there. It actually exists in Nichols Point. They never got round to building 2nd or 3rd or 4th, but they did build 5th. 6th somehow or other is over there, and then there's 7th, and everything is honky-dory after that. But 7th to 11th was his design. After you go from 11th to 13th, 14th, 15th, it changes a bit, but that's not Chaffee. His design was wonderful, and there were shops and there were houses, all beautifully arranged in the 3 centre streets. Deacon Avenue, named after the Minister for Water Supply. Langtree Avenue, named after the Secretary for Water. And Madden Avenue, named after the local member, the member for Wimmera, was Walter Madden. So that's how we got these 3, and they were beautiful streets and designed to be part of living. When things came on the paddle steamers, the obvious place to unload them was at the bottom of Madden Avenue. So we built shops on Madden Avenue. They all eventually fell into disuse because then we got the railway. So that means Langtree Avenue becomes your main business thoroughfare. But there were shops here and there were houses here, and I've stopped you here because the first house was right there. It's not there anymore, except that it is behind that facade. To see it, you've got to go to the lane behind and have a look, and you say, oh, so it is. There's a house there, and that was the first house built in Deacon Avenue. We're going to go up only about 4 or 5 places to the first where the first shop was. It was Williams and Ewell, named after Henry B. Williams, who built the first store, general store in town. Let's go for a walk. Williams' store was here. That's why we've got a blue plaque on it. It was a two-storey building, and if you ever look at those earliest photographs of Deakin Avenue, those that were taken on an elevation were taken at the, not that particular veranda, but the veranda there on. Now forgive me, I've got some people here who count differently from me. I'm going to refer to that as the first floor. That's the ground floor, and that's the first floor, unless you come from somewhere where that's the first floor, so that's the second floor. But that's where the veranda was, and all of those photographs that you see in, for example, the Oswald collection that are taken from a slight elevation were taken from there. But this is where the first store was. It was a wonderful department store. Henry Williams was our first Shire president. He was also the father-in-law of his partner, Ewell. So it was Williams and Ewell. I'm not going to talk about every building along the place. They're all gorgeous, and I miss terribly the old National Bank, which was a beautiful old building. But we'll cross 8th Street now. One of the most special things that W.B. Chaffee did was to build a beautiful house. We call the house Rio Vista, and I hope you get a chance to go through it. But yeah, well done, Paul, I like that. But Rio Vista is a gorgeous place now. Why? And that was to tell the settlers, the people who were buying into Mildura, that we are permanent. We are here because we wanted to be permanent. I can tell you something contemptuous. There are lots of fly-by-nighters. There are lots of people who come in, do the business, make as much money as they can as rapidly as possible and nick off. And by building that house, he proved that he was permanent here, and that was what it was all about. In front of the house, he placed a fountain. Now, the Chaffees were wonderful fountain builders. They put fountains everywhere they went, and they built a fountain in front. Tragedy was to strike because one of the sons, a little boy, was drowned in the fountain, so it was turned off. After W.B. died, his widow hated the fountain so much because of its history and decided to be magnanimous and give it to the city. And in 1935, King George V had been the king for 25 years. So to mark that 25th anniversary, they donated the fountain that was in front of Rio Vista, and it's now there. That's the fountain that was in front of Rio Vista in the first place. The one that's there now was added in 1991, the centenary of Rio Vista. Back at about, I can't remember what year it was, but something like about 1985 or 6, people like to celebrate New Year's Eve. And some young kids climbed up on the fountain to celebrate New Year's Eve and broke it. So, of course, we had to get it fixed. We sent it off to Bendigo, who were the only people capable of fixing that sort of fountain, and they did. Beautiful job. But in the process, they made a mould, and they gave an instruction to the city of Mildura saying, look, if ever you want a duplicate, we've got the mould now, we can make a duplicate. So in 1991, the Shire of Mildura, which was out beyond 14th Street, had one made, and that's the one that is there. But if you read around the outside of the seating there, you can see this was erected in honour of the 25th anniversary of King George V. Now, if you don't mind, I'll do the next part from here rather than make you cross the road. That area over there, at this end of that plantation, right on 8th Street, there was a massive dais erected for the 25th of March 1954. At that stage, Mildura had a population of somewhere about 10 or 15,000 people, and of those 15,000 people, 85,000 of them came here to see the Queen. We had 3 special trains come up from the Wimmera for people who wanted to see the Queen. And the Queen stood on a dais on that intersection there and spoke to the crowd, and I've got a recording of what she said on that particular occasion. And if you look, you can see there's another one of those perpetual blue plaques that is there to say this is where the Queen was. And so that's very special to us there. Now, I think we'll try to there's lots of other things I should talk about, but time is getting away from us. I think we'll simply cross over and go down to the next blue plaque. If you wander around New York, you'll see thousands of buildings that look like that, where there's a grill, there's a passageway down there, people live down the stairs or up the stairs. Nothing is quite level with the ground. You're either up a bit or down a bit, and New York has thousands of those. We've got one. But this is a special address. This has actually been a lot of things. It was a local newspaper for a while, back in the days of the Cultivator, etc., etc. Some people remember it as the Steak Cave, or as a place where they learnt how to play the drums, or dozens and dozens. I've never seen, it used to have billiard tables. It's got everything in here in its history. At the moment it's owned by La Trobe University, but for the moment I can't believe that this is the end of the story. It will have another chapter as well, and another chapter after that, and will continue to be one of the most interesting addresses in town. Once again, we are missing all sorts of things. The building over the road is Sunraysia Daily, which has been our newspaper since 1920. And that's where television began in Mildura in 1965 with what was called Sunraysia Television, STV8. We've gone a long way since then. Nowadays people never can decide what to watch tonight. But back in those days you had 2 choices. You either watched Channel 4 or Channel 8. If you watched Channel 8 you'd see Superman. If you watched Channel 4 you got Bellbird. But that's Sunraysia Daily over there, and that's been very important. The motel on the corner, Commodore, was where our very first guest house was. It was such a rabbit warren that they called it the Warren. That was known as the Warren until it was demolished in 1965, and then the Commodore Motel took over. But this is where this area here from, say, 7th to 9th is so historically significant in many ways. And I'm still working on writing it all down. I've written a few of the walkie things you can do down, but I think what we'll do now is try to get across the road one more time to get to the 7th Street lawns. Just to refresh your historical memories, Princess Diana died in 1997. But Diana came here with Charles when they were Prince and Princess of Wales in 1985 to mark the 150th anniversary of Victoria. Melbourne had been established in 1835, so in 1985 we had these massive sesquicentenary celebrations, and Charles and Diana were invited here. Well, this is the Charles and Diana fountain. There's a little plaque over there just on those steps leading to the walk bridge saying that Charles and Diana, Prince and Princess of Wales, were here, and so this is our Charles and Diana memorial, if you like. I want to take you to that next piece of sculpture. That's 1985. In 1987, Mildura turned 100, and we had a great battery of Uplanders who came and celebrated with us in 1987. But I want to take you over to that piece of sculpture just there, if you don't mind. Most of the time it's the Chaffey brothers we celebrate. The Chaffey brothers who did so much to establish Mildura in the 1880s. And what an incredible thing it was that they were so different. If they had both played together as kids, if they had both gone to the same universities, if they had both turned out as brilliant as each other in the same position, we would not have had Mildura. But they were several years different in age. They were 8 years different in age, and those of you with kids know that's a terrible difference between the two of them. They don't grow up together playing the same game of, I was going to say cricket, but let me say baseball, at the same time. George Chaffey was an engineering genius. He designed all of the wonderful things that bring the water from Mount Baldy down to Ontario. And he did the same thing upside down in Mildura. He brought the water up from the Murray to Mildura. We're very lucky here, we're on an elevation. When Mildura had its worst flood in 1956, where we are now was as dry as a bone, because it didn't get up the hill. Massive flood, but it couldn't get up the hill. We are on elevated ground here, but George Chaffey was able to overcome that with a series of 3 power stations, the Nichols Point, Billabong and Psyche pumping stations, to get the water to flow down the channels through the entire district. Brilliant. And of course his brother knew everything there was to know about growing fruit. He knew what fruits would do well, what not to plant, what will be seasonal and what will be perennial. And of course he was also brilliant at streetscaping. He designed Deakin Avenue, 7th Street, 8th Street, 9th Street, 10th Street, 11th Street, Madden Avenue, Langtree Avenue, and as far as Ontario Avenue. And forgive my pronunciation, San Mateo Avenue. I wish we called it that here, but there we are, we're stuck with San Mateo. He was terrible at engineering. He was wonderful at public speaking. George Chaffey didn't know a thing about fruit and hated public speaking. So between the two of them, I've often compared them to Moses and Aaron, who in the Bible, between the two of them, could do everything. What Moses couldn't do, Aaron could, and vice versa. However, for the next 2 minutes, I'm not going to talk about the Chaffee brothers at all, because before anything can happen, someone has to have a vision. And the man with the vision was Alfred Deakin. And Alfred Deakin